Yes, hello everybody, and thank you for the invitation. Has to say that maybe some of you saw another person from Gale in the program, my colleague Jeff Riesom, who actually had a walking accident last week, so he couldn't come. It's nothing serious, but he asked if I could go instead, because for us to come to Berlin and see and learn also what you're doing here is definitely worth the time. Anyway, my title. I think for sure you all know that the way we design our cities, the way we design...
And this live stream, so look into the camera.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then maybe I'll move this. Anyway, the way we design our cities, the way we design mobility for sure impact how we move in our cities. But still I choose that title about you can't disrupt the city, because there's a lot of things that are kind of given when we are also among humans in an urban environment. For example, we are essentially social creatures. We like to be around other people. We like to look at other people. There's also something very important about what Jan Gehl, who started the office I'm working in, as Martin mentioned, has worked a lot with this about the human scale and what kind of scale in our cities do we actually prefer as human beings. So there's something about how, from which level do we see the cities. Our brain really needs stimuli when we move in our cities, and the good cities have a design where actually this constant stimuli when we are walking is about almost like every 4 seconds, and that really match how a lot of cities are set up with these different facades. So there's something around this you cannot change no matter how probably advanced technology and solutions we come up with. We're still human beings. So I think that's one kind of key point of mine. It's a very broad topic here. That also meant when I was asked to come and speak, I thought, oh, I could speak for an hour about car parking, the dark matter of urban planning, or Lastenfahrrad or whatever, but I choose a couple of concepts I think are interesting at the moment. I'll come back to them in a moment. But also looked at some of these. How have we looked at the future of mobility when we have tried to imagine? And the interesting thing is a lot of these drawings actually look pretty much the same. And it doesn't look very attractive from a kind of a human scale point of view. So I think, to put it very, very simple, we can say where we are now. Do we move ahead more or less as we're doing, just with more fancy cars, maybe going on electricity, or we try really to change how we design our cities and really focus on what is a good everyday life in our cities and how can the way we design the mobility system support that good everyday life. And no big surprise, I will kind of focus some of my reflections on that kind of scenario at the top. Very briefly about me, I've been working at Gale for 6 years, mainly advising larger cities on urban strategy, very often with a key focus on transport, but also quite often with an extra focus on cycling, since I have a past as a director of the bicycle program at the city of Copenhagen, but I have in general worked within transport, mobility in urban areas for years. And I've had the pleasure of also working quite a lot in Germany the last couple of years. Currently, for example, we're doing a mobility and public space plan in Karlsruhe, which for me is an example of a city where we had an early dialogue, and my point to them was, actually when we look at Germany from Denmark and also compare with a lot of other countries, you are doing extremely well with efficient public transport systems in many of your cities, but maybe where if Karlsruhe wanted to take it to a next step, it's how do we link this very efficient and functional traffic system to how we think that the more broader city design and the quality of our public spaces, because these things are really, really interlinked. So that's just one example of what Gale and what I'm working at currently in Germany. I'll not go into this, except I think this is still worth stressing sometimes when you speak about mobility and traffic. One thing that's interesting is that the word traffic, it is often, when people say traffic, what they mean is actually car traffic. So often you have to ask, so when you say traffic, are you also speaking about people walking and people cycling? And sometimes people are not, sometimes they are. But I think for us at Gale, it's really important to remember when we speak about mobility, it's about moving people, not moving vehicles. And that can, even it sounds kind of basic, I think it's often kind of forgotten. So 2 themes I will reflect on a bit today, and try to keep my time to the around 15 minutes. There's this term that at least in Denmark has been quite popular for a while, not so much maybe the last year or 2, but I think it's still interesting as a concept, the modal surfer. I'll get back to it. And then there's this thing, and it's a little bit technical, but especially in, I think in the English-speaking countries, they have this method they call the level of traffic stress. And you use that to measure the quality of your traffic system, especially when cycling and walking. And I really find it interesting can we turn this around and instead speak of a level of traffic enjoyment, because this about the quality of our mobility system is really important for the quality of our daily life. So instead of speaking about stress, can we speak about how can we create, a better everyday life? So I'll start speaking a little bit about this, and this is just some of these methods to measure this stress. It's very systematic. It's very and nothing wrong with this method, but I think just this focus on kind of enjoyment and quality of life in a way, I think that can bring us further in that, you could say, hunt for that positive scenario I showed in the beginning. This is Jan Gehl, who started our company, and he's really been focusing on really focus on how do people actually behave and not how do we think they behave. And again, it's very basic stuff, but this is still seen a lot, these kind of misunderstandings. We also work a lot with data to try to back up our recommendations, our designs. We work with a lot of different kinds of clients, just like it's my impression you are a very diverse crowd here today from a lot of different kinds of companies, organizations, cities. But Jan Gehl really have this about you measure what you care about, and that is really also key when we work. And this is a very simple example of that. This is from Times Square in New York. It's quite old project we did, but still it was interesting. If you look at the Times Square in the old days, the pedestrian area was only 11%. The space for the cars were 89%. But actually, 90% of the users were pedestrians. And I think it also goes back to some of the things you said about how much car parking, how much space it takes up, and so on. And only 10% were motorists. This is not fancy data and big data, but it's a key number to have still in many of the projects we do. And it really had an impact. So actually it played a crucial role in being able to convince the political level and also in the public in New York that of course the space there should better reflect both the overall mobility vision of the city, but also who's actually using this space. Just a very simple example of this about using data. Back to these 2 scenarios, and this about enjoyment. You are so good at doing cars in Germany. There's also a lot of other things you're very good at, but I think there's something interesting in how this the dream about the car and the image and the freedom related to the car. How can we be even better at using that when we speak about alternatives to the car? And there's a fear of this all being a romance that is not realistic, but there's something about how do we this about enjoyment, the level of enjoyment. How can we put words and how can we design so we can increase these kinds of enjoyment we can have, whether it's a social interaction when we use public transport. It is this very nice feeling we sometimes can have when we are cycling through a city. And again, there's no need to be naive. Sometimes it's not always a great morning like today, but there's really something about how can we use these feelings and emotionally strategically and also be willing to invest in using this strategically. I mean, you can move and you can do things like that. That is really a quality of life, and being aware of that and kind of work with that in a strategic way when we speak about our city, I think that's important. The e-scooters, another example, a lot of people are actually really enjoying them. We're working with some of these providers, and there's a whole list of problems with these vehicles, but there's also, again, now I'm speaking about this, about enjoyment and daily life. They also really provide something to people. You can see how he's almost laughing before he starts, and they can't wait to get going on that thing. So there's this about, back to this, this enjoyment. And also the interesting thing, boring planners like me, I interviewed somebody at the city of Oslo. They said, and I can feel the same. Sometimes you can almost be angry if you see somebody having fun. It's like, no, it's serious. It's mobility. You shouldn't be like that. But maybe we have to kind of rewind a bit there. And how to create this enjoyment? I know Pokemon Go is not a new thing. But with the competencies in this room, and I think this whole gamification, there's a huge potential that haven't been worked with strategically from a city perspective with big companies that can really do that in making it attractive to cycle, walking, combine modes, using car share, whatever. There's really something there, I believe. Then there's this whole thing about really linking the thinking of public space with mobility and really understanding that streets are not just links to move things. It is also a public space, and the quality of that street as a public space, again, helps improve the quality of walking, cycling, and so on in our cities. And I think you have a lot of great streets in Berlin. They really are also public spaces, but for sure also a city like Berlin can do even more on this topic. Back to enjoyment and these things that are sometimes overlooked when we serious transport planners are working. This is, I simply couldn't translate this word. It means it's a point in the city where I really feel the city. So sense means to sense something. And we interviewed somebody when I worked at the city of Copenhagen. We interviewed both a lot of people cycling and the people not cycling to understand what is important to get more people cycling. And there was this woman who said, oh yeah, I have this sensepunkt when I cycle to work. Every day, this is where I really feel the city or the nature or whatever it was. And again, it's just an example of how in our design to remember these topics that creates enjoyment. And it's a key in promoting these kind of modes we're speaking about, I think. And then, of course, how do we organize the change between modes and so on? It's a classic. We could have had a whole day about that, so, but just to mention it. Another thing is this about the 15-minute city or the 1-minute city and whatever, but just this is from Aarhus, the second biggest city in Denmark, and you know this is a mobility tool that is probably more efficient than building several cycle tracks, because suddenly all these people can go down to the harbor and get a swim instead of getting in a car or whatever and going out to the beach in the suburbs. So again, when we think about how do we prioritize resources, when we think about mobility, this is about remembering the importance of these high-quality local destinations to actually follow up on that thinking of the 15-minute city or the 5-minute city, depending on city size. It's really key. And I've seen far too little research in the mobility impact of things like that. Again, going back to the data. Other examples, see more playgrounds for me is really a tool of the traffic planner as well. How do we think our schoolyards? Are they more than just a fenced-off area in the afternoon and evening? Is it really a community hub where we really put resources in to make it nice, not just during the school day, but also in the evening? And without being cynical, I can say also as in Paris, if we want to do traffic calming, so we really get good conditions for walking and cycling and so on, then this about starting with the schools, starting with the children, makes that sometimes very heated debate a little bit easier. And this is exactly what they're doing, for example, in Paris, doing that in a very systematic way. And there's hope. This is from Göteborg, where we have worked, and they have done this investigation on what are people's loyalty to different traffic modes and how attracted are they to different traffic modes. And actually, people are very happy with the bicycle, and also they're quite loyal to it. You can see they're quite loyal to the car. It's really a strong habit, but it's not seen as attractive. This is Göteborg. But there's something around cycling, walking, the e-scooter, the car share. There's several surveys, at least I know of, that actually shows if people get to try these things, they actually like it quite a lot. So there's really a barrier and a focus area how to get people to try it. That is part of the challenge, because we see a lot of these. This is IKEA's homepage, and it's very, very nice. But I'm sure this is 1 out of 1,500 or 1 out of 10,000 that collects stuff like that. It's racing for sure, but there's really an issue of scale with many of these things, and I think this is where a gathering like this is interesting, because we can do all the nice experiments we want with test an e-bike and so on, but if it's 30 people, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's a good story and then it's done, but it's not changing anything. So for me, in a discussion like today, there's really this issue of how do we scale up these things. Then working at a city also for several years, there's really something about wanting to innovate and do things differently that in a political environment sometimes is very challenging. Because as soon as you do something that is not normal at a political level, you are an easy target for attacks. And I think sometimes working at companies outside political environment, this is a little bit different. But I think it's important to be aware of and to understand. And this is just a couple of examples from Copenhagen. We did these footrests. They cost like 500 euros. I mean, it's nothing. People loved them. But still, it was a point of attack on the mayor. Oh, it's wasting. This is not core business for the city. What is the next? Will you buy shoelaces to people and so on? So as soon as you do something that is a little bit different, it's just hard in a political environment. It's the same. We did campaigns to make people cycle in a nice way. Work well, great numbers, but still, really, the Lord Mayor do not care. He's waste money on funny, strange projects. So there's really something about understanding how hard it is in a political system to do these a little bit unusual things. So how can cities be helped? And I think there's really something about when we are working with cities to help them ask the right questions. For example, e-scooters. Maybe it's not all about do we want 1,000 or 5,000. Maybe it's where in our mobility mix do we want the e-scooters to do something for us? And then being able to help them identify that. It is really this about data, but it's really also, I have had a lot of dialogue, for example, with German one-way car share companies, where it was very, very hard to get transparent data on are they actually creating new car trips or are they actually helping reduce car trips. So it's really something about, do we as outsiders want to be transparent to the cities and guarantee that we give them the data they need to understand, is this really a good thing for us? So just a couple of examples. And really push cities to be adventurous, but also outside voices matter a lot in a political debate. So a little bit of support sometimes when cities are running into problems when they're trying something new. Just saying, oh, at least you tried, it was a good idea, whatever. It really matters for a politician. It's my experience from working with a lot of politicians in Copenhagen and other cities. Really measure what you care about and being able to provide those data. Just a couple of examples. I'll not go into that. But this is where we are measuring, for example, how is people's route choice when they walk and cycle in Copenhagen affected by these softer qualities as views, as trees, and so on, moving away from just these very functional traffic parameters we normally measure, such as travel time, number of accidents, and so on. Also thinking about e-scooters, for example, how can we, for example, show, this is from the US, okay, if we have this layer of e-scooters, then the people in the less well-off areas, they get access to this amount of new kind of potential jobs and so on. So really working with, okay, what is actually the data that cities need to make decisions? Just being able to illustrate, if we really focus on the last mile, cycling or taking the e-scooter to the train, how does it affect the travel time? Where on the top, the dark green illustrate where can this combination with the train compete with the car, and suddenly you have much more green down here when you measure the travel time if you are cycling to the train. So just working with what is the kind of data that's relevant for cities and decision makers is key for me. 2 words on the modal surfer. It's just because I really like that term, the modal surfer. It sounds so nice. But the problem is I always come to think about this, believe in the economic man, where we think everything is about rationality, and if we just get the full information, then we will do the right thing. And the thing is, all this about mobility as a service, and then we every morning will get up and look at our phone and make a new decision. There's so much research when we speak about mobility and everyday life that habit is such a strong driver. So I guess my reflection here is just, I don't really think this modal surfer that every morning gets up and look what is the fastest for me. I don't really believe in it. I think habit, we should really not underestimate habit, no matter how advanced our technologies becomes. Then we should rather work with the habit, so to say. That's just what I already said. The last word. Oh yeah. Remember the habit, and then it's too easy, but this is a very nice slide from the Copenhagen on the smart city. And you see all the sensors everywhere. And then at least they put these couple of people in there. So I guess my last remark to you is really to remember this eye-level perspective when we have these discussions, how can technology help? And in this case, I think there's really a key question not being addressed on this slide, and That is, how is the lunch they're eating? Because maybe that's the most important for those two people. So that was it. Thank you.